wide range of backgrounds, and then they move into a space. And I mean, I know there is training for new MPs, but you know, I remember the situation when my father was on the school board, you know, just going in and having responsibilities outside of your own experience.
Very interesting stuff with Thomas Pryor and Joe McCarroll this afternoon. Now, I wanted to get to this one, another political one, but overseas now. Finishing up over in the Ukraine today, where an extraordinary presidential election is picking up pace. After the first round of voting, Volodymyr Zelensky holds a commanding lead with around 29% of the vote, around 12% ahead of his nearest rival. Zelensky is running on an anti-corruption, pro-EU platform, revamping the country's justice laws and removing legal immunity from the president, parliament and judges, and clearly has struck a chord. The problem is, he's not a politician. He has no political experience whatsoever. He is, in fact, a comedian and actor who, get this, has actually played the president of Ukraine in a TV series. This is, in all seriousness, like the USA voting in Martin Sheen because he played the president in the West Wing for 8 years. What do you think of this, Joe? The Ukraine obviously has its own unique political system, but even so, what does this say about how people view politics? Politicians.
I think actors would make quite good politicians. You know, they have the ability to, you know, present to the public.
Good hair.
They have good hair. They look... Martin Sheen, he's got great hair.
Presidential.
But I mean... Ronald Reagan.
Well, I'm just thinking Ronald Reagan. He was...
Ronald Reagan, exactly.
Yes,
yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. I don't see a problem with it at all. But I do think it's funny that he played the president.
Yeah.
It's an example where perhaps you wonder if people realise what's real.
Or is it an example of the way that we're deeply disenfranchised with politics?
Well, I think, funnily enough, linking back to two topics we've discussed today already. One, there was something like 38 candidates, apparently. So this is only the first round. So there's probably a lot of people with no idea, actually, who they're voting for or what's going on. But yeah, secondly, my kind of understanding is there's a large degree of disenfranchisement, especially from young people going, hey, establishment politicians and establishment parties have failed us. This guy's offering a slightly fresh offering, so we'll give it a shot. So, you know, maybe there's overtures of Brexit, who knows?
Yeah. And it's not a new phenomenon, is it? I'm just actually thinking quite a few examples. I'm thinking of like the likes of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yep. Wasn't there somewhere in America that's just elected a goat as mayor?
As mayor, that's absolutely right.
And Hamilton could look into that. Hamilton's mayor is excellent.
Probably better quality social media.
It's not a good way to end the show. What's a local example of someone who hadn't had political experience but went from zero to...
What about, Tim Shadbolt? Not that he lacked... obviously he was an activist, but, you know, he moved from a space of being a performer into being a politician.
Yeah. Well, Tamati Coffee.
Tamati Coffee, that's right, yeah. Very, very good. Well, Thomas Pryor, Joe McCarroll, you've both been fantastic this afternoon. Thanks for the Brexit Explainer too. Might get you back on that. But we're going to go out with a magnificent Wellington Ukulele Orchestra covering Justin Timberlake's Cry Me River. Thanks to Simon Wilson for the suggestion. And I'm back tomorrow from 3:45. Thanks for listening. Checkpoint's up next.
Confused with some other guy. I'm not like them, baby. Bridges were burned. Now it's your turn. It's your turn to cry. Cry me a river. Go on and just cry me a river. Baby, go on and just cry me a river. Go on and just cry me a river.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, with the clock ticking, MPs are flooded with submissions on proposed gun law changes. Gun City owner David Tipple refuses to front for an interview but releases a video statement. Checkpoint puts his claims to the test. We have the latest on the Crusaders' name change. The knights on horseback, swords and crosses are all gone. The Black Cap squad is revealed for the Cricket World Cup. The Auckland graffiti artist who painted the mural of a mosque shooting victim has been invited to create another tribute. And holy guacamole, America could be facing an avocado shortage if President Trump shuts the US-Mexico border. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia Dawa tēnei. The Police Association fears criminals could be buying up guns that are set to become illegal under new legislation. Its president, Chris Cahill, says it's irresponsible of gun dealers to continue selling weapons like the military-style semi-automatic shotgun advertised on the gun supplies website this morning.
You have to be concerned that if they're not going to be able to be brought back, will these weapons be hidden? Will they go into the illegal gun supply? And that's what would be the biggest concern, that they will still be out there post any buyback because they're not part of it. And you'd have to wonder why someone would be spending their money now knowing that it's money down the drain.
Chris Cahill says the gun dealers concerned should look at their ethics. The owner of Gun Supplies declined to be interviewed, but the listings were deleted after RNZ got in touch. Several thousand submissions have flooded into MPs on the fast-tracked gun legislation. A Ukrainian migrant suspected to have committed suicide after a 3-hour-long standoff with police in Christchurch made reference to the terror attacks. Troy Dubovsky was found dead in his car in the early hours of last Wednesday. Conan Young reports.
More details have now been revealed by the police. They say he came to their attention after sending emails making reference to the mosque attacks, and he posed a significant threat to the community. The police say it's clear Mr Dubovsky supported the actions of the man charged over the mosque attacks. However, no connection has been established between the two. A search of his home and another 2 houses uncovered firearms, ammunition and violent extremist content. The police say he was forcibly taken from his car and dragged along the ground, where he received a dog bite to the face. They say 2 people are still under investigation and they are therefore not able to comment further. Kei Ototahi Aho, ko Conan Young tēnei.
The head of the Crusaders says their sword-wielding horsemen in the pre-match entertainment will be dropped for the rest of the season as the team looks at a name and image change. The BNZ Crusaders and New Zealand Rugby have hired a research company to help decide on the team's future labelling in response to the Christchurch mosque attacks. The chief executive of the BNZ Crusaders, Colin Mansbridge, says the researchers will look at whether the name is kept but the imagery changes, or whether a new name is needed. Mr Mansbridge says until that decision is made, the pre-match entertainment will change.
One of the things that was quite clear, if you put the name Crusaders together with the horses and the crosses and the swords, and you do those things together, it's a clear reference to the first definition of what the word Crusader means, and that's not what we intended.
Colin Mansbridge says a decision on a name will be made before the start of the next rugby season. The police say they have not made arrests after today's siege of a house in the Auckland suburb of Glen Eden. Nearby schools were locked down during the siege, which lasted for several hours. Jessie Chang reports.
Emergency services were alerted to reports of a shot being fired on West Coast Road just after 10 o'clock this morning. The Armed Defenders Squad was sent in and multiple schools and a church were put into lockdown as a precautionary measure. Cordons were in place for nearly 3 hours. Witnesses described a heavy police presence and officers surrounding a house. The police have now left the scene after talking to several people at the property. Ko Jessie Chang tēnei.
A man found with a suitcase containing more than 13,000 pills and 500 vials of prescription medicines has been sentenced to 80 hours community work. 41-year-old Donald Dews appeared in the Wellington District Court today on 17 Medicines Act charges, to which he had earlier pleaded guilty. He had been given the drugs by a gym acquaintance and had been selling them through social media with homemade labels to make them look more legitimate. Judge Bill Hastings says the buyer's health was at risk as Dews was not a doctor. The police have launched a homicide investigation into the death of a toddler in Tauranga. Sadie Lee Gardner was taken to Tauranga Hospital from an address on Maungatapu Road with critical injuries last Wednesday. The 17-month-old girl died 2 days later. The police say they're treating her death as a homicide after medical examinations and looking at post-mortem results. Pharmac has hit back at accusations it is depriving cancer patients of life-saving drugs. Parliament's Health Select Committee is considering a petition calling for the drug Ibrance and Cadicilia
to be funded for advanced breast cancer. Drug firms Roche and Pfizer New Zealand attacked Pharmac over the issue today, saying it was making millions of dollars in savings for health and more money needs to be spent on drugs. But the Pharmac chief executive, Sarah Fitt, says the drugs are expensive for the benefits claimed.
These medicines are coming with a sort of low, medium priority with quite a high price tag. We have other medicines who have a higher priority that we will actually be looking to fund more quickly.
Sarah Fitt also defended the time Pharmac takes to process applications to fund a drug, saying it is extremely detailed. It's 5:05. Uncapped wicketkeeper Tom Blundell and leg spinner Ish Sodhi have won contentious battles for places in the New Zealand squad to contest the Cricket World Cup. New Zealand is the first nation to unveil its 15-strong squad for the tournament in England and Wales starting next month, with Kane Williamson leading an experienced batting group and Trent Boult spearheading the bowlers. 7 members of the squad were part of New Zealand's maiden final appearance at the 2015 tournament. Latham will be the first choice keeper, with Wellington's Blundell promoted as backup, with Stead saying his glove work was better than Tim Seyfert's.
We felt in the 15 that we needed a genuine backup wicketkeeper, and for us, picking Tom was a direct, I guess, replacement for Tom Latham if he was injured, and if that was the case, then he can fit straight into the batting role that we see that Tom Latham plays as well.
Gary Stead. Fulham have been relegated from English football's Premier League with 5 games still to play after being hammered 4-1 by Watford. They joined Huddersfield Town, who have also been consigned to the Championship next season. Meanwhile, Wolverhampton Wanderers have dented Manchester United's hopes of playing in European football's Champions League next season. Wolves won 2-1 to leave United 5th on the table, having played 1 more game than their top 4 rivals. 2 New Zealand crews are leading their fleets after the second day of the Princess Sophia sailing regatta in Spain. Olympic silver medalists Molly Meach and Alex Maloney are on top of the 49er FX, and Andy Maloney leads the Finn. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, episode 5 of our drama marking the 40th anniversary of the Iranian Revolution, the fall of the Shah. Tonight, the USA has to decide whether to stick with its old ally or cut him adrift. And we celebrate the 70th birthday of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, set out to protect Western Europe from Soviet threat. Only these days the biggest threat appears to be from Donald Trump. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula. A few showers, possibly heavy, but mainly dry for Auckland City, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine weather, however, isolated showers affect the Central High Country and also Bay of Plenty and Taupo from tomorrow afternoon. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, often cloudy with a few showers. Wellington, Wairarapa and coastal Marlborough, fine spells and isolated showers today, fine tomorrow. For inland Marlborough and Nelson, fine weather. Bulla mainly fine but isolated coastal showers tomorrow morning. Westland and Fiordland mostly fine today, however late showers in Fiordland, showers spreading northwards tomorrow, clearing Fiordland from tomorrow afternoon. For Canterbury, mostly fine, rain spreading northwards tomorrow evening. Otago and Southland fine today, rain spreading northwards tomorrow, followed by showers. At the Chatham Islands, a few showers. It's coming up to 5:08. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. And this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. MPs have been deluged with several thousand submissions on the fast-tracked gun legislation, which will ban most types of semi-automatic firearms. But there are concerns about the pace of change, with just 1 day set aside tomorrow for oral submissions from the public. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Miles Anderson is a Timaru farmer, a gun owner, a spokesperson for Federated Farmers, one of a few dozen people to be invited to present to MPs tomorrow on the new gun ban and buyback.
Notified, I have to look at my phone for the email, but late morning I was notified.
Just 1 day's notice because of the compressed timeline. Miles Anderson will now wing his way to Wellington tomorrow morning.
Well, it's not ideal. The time frame makes it harder to put forward a well-considered and worked-on submission.
The Select Committee has just 1 day set aside tomorrow to hear submissions from the general public. Usually people apply to address MPs in person. This time a select group of about 20 to 25 people was selected to present. They'll each get 10 to 15 minutes each. The committee's chair and Labour MP, Michael Wood, says the submitters were chosen to represent a cross-section of views.
This is a shorter time frame than usual, but we are dealing with a situation in which 50 people were murdered by one of these weapons, and the New Zealand public expect us to move with some reasonable speed on this issue, while making sure that there is some oversight of the legislation.
ACT's David Seymour has been the sole voice of opposition during the gun debate, chiefly upset about the pace of change. He says MPs are showing total contempt for the lawmaking process.
I don't think people are taking seriously enough the desecration of democracy by taking out the whole part where we actually listen to the public and consult before we make a law that affects them.
But National's Simon Bridges is comfortable with the timeline.
There's a sense of urgency and unity now, and the government is seizing upon that. I get that, and we're up for that.
A rare moment of unity across the House. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, freshly back from her whirlwind trip to China, says the ban is relatively straightforward and has near unanimous support in Parliament.
So if everyone's in agreement, then understandably there's good grounds to move quickly.
We need to act and act now.
People are also welcome to write in with their feedback on the bill. Several thousand have already done so since yesterday. The deadline for written submissions closes at 6 o'clock tomorrow night, after which MPs will take stock and consider if any changes need to be made. Atu i te whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch.
Meanwhile, tonight we put the claims of Gun City owner David Tipple to the test after he released a video statement to Checkpoint but refused to be interviewed. Following the March 15 mosque massacres, Mr Tipple revealed his business had sold the accused gunman 4 A-category firearms and ammunition, but not the assault rifle believed to be used in the attack. On his website, he encourages shooting enthusiasts to lobby MPs and the media about the proposed gun law changes, but he warns them to avoid direct interviews, saying you may not be presented as you wish. Instead, Mr Tipple has released a video statement. In it, he describes gun registration as a folly, calls for more empathy for legal gun owners, and questions whether politicians are going for easy votes rather than addressing our greatest public health issues. Checkpoint has repeatedly asked Mr Tipple to come on the show and discuss gun law reform, but he refuses to front. So we gave experts and community members the chance to respond to the claims he makes in his video.
Rather than divide us, this tragedy has actually created unity and a beautiful empathy within New Zealand. I would like that unity and empathy to be extended to legal gun owners, our employees and our families. Rushing this law is causing division. This proposed feel-good law is a distraction from our failures and pretends that there will be good outcomes.
Community advocate Guled Meyer responds.
I actually think that's quite a flawed statement to make. I've been a Muslim community advocate and I've been down in Christchurch. I'm directly involved with the victims' families, just trying to support them in ways that I can, but also trying to be a voice for the community in such a tough, difficult period. This legislation will actually go towards a long way in ensuring that we are safe in this country. The vast majority of the Muslims that I've spoken to are in absolutely support, so are the vast majority of New Zealanders, and I think that's quite selfish to turn this around and just make it about gun owners. I think empathy has already been shown to gun owners by already ensuring that we are not introducing a full ban on all guns.
Every society has guns, and there is no correlation between the forceful reduction of gun numbers and an improvement in public safety. Increased education with respect to gun ownership increases public safety. Gatekeepers who are vigilant and wise lead to increased public safety. One brave and quick-thinking man, a gatekeeper if you like, stopped the second mosque attack.
Let's hear from Dr Samara McFedrin, a gun violence expert from Griffith University.
The dominant school of thought is often that more guns equals more gun violence. Now, that may sound intuitively correct, but the statistics actually tell quite a different story. We've actually had steady increases in the number of licence holders and the number of legally owned guns but ongoing decreases in firearm homicide and firearm suicide. And that holds even when you take into account the changing population size. So we're certainly not seeing a case of more guns equals more gun crime. We're actually seeing the opposite. Now, I'm not saying that there's any causal relationship in there. Rather, a more likely explanation is that levels of legal firearm ownership aren't related to levels of firearm misuse. So there's actually a lot more to the story than people may realise on its surface.
Firearms researcher Dr. Marie Russell.
I've reviewed 130 studies in 10 different countries and found that there is definitely an association between better gun control and fewer fatalities.
Gun registration is a failure. This murderer had his purchases registered by way of individually approved police mail order forms. Registration is a folly. It's too large a topic to be covered here.
Over to Otago University firearms researcher Dr. Marie Russell.
I don't think gun registration is ineffective at all, as he claims. It seems to work very, very well in other countries. Australia, for example, introduced a registration system after the big changes they had there in their law, and it seems to work quite well. I'm told that when police there, for example, are called to a situation where there might be firearms, they can easily check what's actually there and be prepared to deal with it.
Dr. Samara McFedrin, a gun violence expert from Griffith University.
When we look at countries such as Canada, for example, they had a very similar experience. They had gun registration there for rifles and shotguns from the mid-1990s. What they found was that it had very little, if any, impact on firearm misuse, and that it was extremely costly to run, but ultimately ineffective in preventing violence. Registration is one of those areas where it may seem like common sense, it may seem intuitively appealing, but the evidence just doesn't back it up as an effective violence prevention strategy.
Self-loading firearms are legitimate and efficient tools for hunting and pest control. The law proposed, the new law proposes that only government or government-approved agencies can own them. So, what can we expect from this? Reduced pest control, more damage to our environment and more poison. Farmers need to be able to control their own pests cost effectively.
Hunter Lou Stoddard has this to say.
Well, this is just silly. I mean, semi-automatic rifles are an efficient tool, but they're not the only tool. Most farm pest controllers, rabbits and possums, and 10-shot semi-auto 22s will remain legal for that purpose. For larger animals like goats and wallabies, bolt action, other types of rifles are usually going to be adequate, and in special cases where high volume shooting is really necessary, farmers will still be able to hire professional shooters. If you can't shoot a rabbit in 10 shots, hire a professional.
We have blinkers on if we're only focusing on guns. How about violent video games? Is it easier for MPs to attract feel-good votes by discriminating against gun owners than by addressing our greatest public safety issues, such as child violence, youth suicides, methamphetamine, and our children being given too much time on electronic devices and being too poorly behaved to take to the supermarket?
Dr. Marie Russell.
I do disagree with him that having children who are too poorly behaved to take to the supermarket is one of the greatest public safety issues. This is a classic response from people in the gun lobby, actually, and they learn it from the NRA in the United States and other places. to distract us from the real issue and to go on the offensive about things that are not up for discussion at the moment. And I would also dispute that the government is not working on things like youth suicide and child violence and methamphetamine. The government is working on those issues.
And in Australia, senators both sides of the political divide have come together to censure Senator Fraser Anning for his anti-Muslim comments in the wake of the Christchurch terror attack. Mr Anning said the cause of the attacks was Muslim immigration and said the attack showed Islam was always associated with violence. His comments have been widely condemned, but today Mr Anning was unrepentant. Dean Bedford reports.
Going into today's Senate debate, Mr Anning was laughing off the possibility of being censured.
I hope it's not too painful. What's Mr Morrison going to give me a flogging with his lace hanky or something like that, is it? I'm not sure.
But there wasn't much laughter when the debate started, with the Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann, calling Mr Anning's remarks appalling and inflammatory.
Senator Anning's comments were ugly and divisive. They were dangerous and unacceptable from anyone, let alone a member of this place.
Unusually, the government motion was seconded and supported by the Senate's opposition leader, Labour's Penny Wong.
While those injured were being treated, this senator sought to further fan the flames of division. How pathetic. How shameful. Well, this motion makes it clear he does not speak for us. He does not speak for this Senate, he does not speak for this nation, and he does not represent Australian values.
Labour Senator Patrick Dodson expressed his condolences to the victims of the attacks. He said Mr Anning had got it all wrong.
The Senator said in his tweet, "The real cause of bloodshed on New Zealand streets today is the immigration program which allowed Muslim fanatics to migrate to New Zealand in the first place. We know the victims were not Muslim fanatics. They are innocent men, women and children at Friday prayers, finding peace and communion with God and their fellow believers. We know that Senator Anning knows the real cause of the bloodshed at Christchurch. The real cause was prejudice, hate and a passion for violent action."
The Greens senators wanted to go further and suspend Mr Anning from the Senate. Sarah Hanson-Young said he no longer deserved to hold the title of senator.
I'm not even going to call him Senator Anning because he doesn't deserve it. He must be suspended. He is not fit to represent the Australian people. He's not fit to call himself Australian. He is not us.
Mr Anning refused to apologise for his comments and said he was the victim of political correctness and the extreme left.
This censure motion against me is a blatant attack on free speech. It is also an exercise in left-wing virtue signalling of the worst kind. Of course, this is exactly the kind of self-righteous left-wing intolerance of alternative views that you would expect from an extremist party like the Greens, Mr President. What is shocking is that it is a supposedly Liberal Prime Minister who is leading the charge, joining hands with Labor and the Greens.
Mr Anning had left the Senate chamber by the time the motion was put, which was carried without being put to a formal vote. It may not be the end of the problems for Senator Anning, who is the subject of a police inquiry, after an altercation in which he punched a teenager who had cracked an egg on his head the day after his anti-Muslim remarks. This is Dean Bedford.
It is 23 after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do get in touch if you want to comment on anything you've heard in the program today. We're always keen to hear from you. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Crusaders rugby team says it's pulling the horse before the cart and doing away with the team's branding but not changing the name. The club has vowed to do away with knights on horseback, swords and crosses in the wake of the Christchurch terror attack. The club says it never intended its imagery to hark back to the religious wars between Christians and Muslims. The CEO of the Crusaders, Colin Mansbridge, says the terror attack on March 15 has rocked the community and it's clear that the Crusaders' name next to the imagery is offensive to Muslims and others. But the name will stay for now. Colin Mansbridge says the club is hiring experts to study the matter of the club's name, but it won't happen this year. He told journalists in Christchurch today that there are different definitions of Crusaders and they want to avoid any future confusion.
We thought that there were three options on the table. The first was to do nothing. The second was to reduce the insignia, iconography and some of the swords and horses and crosses. And then the third was to do a complete name and brand change. We've taken the first option off the table in light of what we've learned post the attack recently. We thought we needed to take that one off the table, and we're going to go through a review process considering option 2 and 3. So 2019, things will be unchanged for us in terms of name, and we will get through this campaign, do this research piece getting through the campaign, albeit you'll see at home games, you'll see a little bit less of swords, horses and crosses and things like that. Any questions?
Why are you contemplating the horses before you've embarked on this review?
So we went and got some expert advice, and one of the things that was quite clear, if you put the name Crusaders together with the horses and the crosses and the swords, and you do those things together, it's a clear reference to the first definition of what the word Crusader means, and that's not what we intended. We've sort of got there, I would say, more accidentally than deliberately, so we want to take that off the table and focus on reclaiming the second definition of the word Crusader.
And that's Colin Mansbridge. Shane Jones is once again under fire for a perceived conflict of interest over comments he made about a court case against a Northland trucking company. Mr Jones is related to Stan Seminoff of Seminoff Logging and is also the Associate Transport Minister, and despite the matter being before the courts, he expressed concern about the economic implications of the case, which was brought by the Transport Agency over safety concerns. The matter was raised in Parliament this afternoon, but Shane Jones is standing by his comments and says he wasn't speaking in his capacity of Associate Minister. Matthew Tennyson reports.
Shane Jones in the House today downplayed his relationship with Stan Seminoff, who gave him a $2,000 donation and who's previously been reported to be his mother's cousin.
Stan Seminoff's great-great-grandmother is my mother's great-great-great-grandmother.
He was also asked why, after he told the New Zealand Herald that constitutionally I must not comment on the High Court case, that he proceeded to do just that.
The principles of comity and privilege are important constitutional privileges that define our system, but there is no stone that should be put upon the tongue of the champion of the regions to talk about the implications of decisions that our government may from time to time be held accountable for.
Mr Jones also confirmed he had briefly spoken to the chief executive of NZTA about the case, but said he wasn't involved in any NZTA decision. Speaking to journalists outside the House, Mr Jones continued to defend his comments about Seminoff Logging.
My focus is on the issues, the supply chain impact in the north in the forestry and logging. I have not commented on anything to do with the innards of that court case.
He also pointed out that the court case hasn't started yet and said he hadn't been speaking as the Associate Transport Minister.
I said those remarks as the Minister of Regional Development. I have no delegations for safety as Associate Minister of Transport. I have never once discussed this issue with Julian Genter, who is the Safety Transport Minister.
It comes less than a month after Mr Jones was accused of having a conflict of interest when he sat in on a meeting in which $4.6 million was granted to build a culture, heritage and education centre in Northland. Mr Jones himself declared the conflict when he became a minister in 2017. The conflict arose because a group that had previously suggested that Mr Jones might chair it had applied for funding. National's Paul Goldsmith called Mr Jones too loose, far too cavalier and arrogant in how he's going about his ministerial duties.
He shouldn't be commenting, he shouldn't be pressuring in any way NZTA around their regulatory responsibilities. Second, it's worse given that there is a connection with the person involved. And he may say it's distant. He referred to Stan Seminoff as his mother's cousin when he gave a donation a few years ago to him. So there's a connection there. Now, all I'm saying is he's got some serious questions to answer to reassure New Zealanders that he is behaving appropriately as a minister.
Stan Seminoff and NZTA declined to comment while the case is before the courts. From Parliament for Checkpoint, call Matthew Tunis and Tēnei.
On Checkpoint on RNZ National, reports of gunfire in West Auckland forces schools and churches to go into lockdown. Drug giants accuse Pharmac of leaving terminally ill cancer patients to die rather than forking out for the latest drugs. And New Zealand announces its squad for the upcoming Cricket World Cup. We'd love to hear from you, so send your feedback in. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to headlines now.
The Police Association fears criminals could be buying up guns that are set to become illegal under new legislation. Its president, Chris Cahill, says it's irresponsible of gun dealers to continue selling weapons like the military-style semi-automatic shotgun advertised on the Gun Supplies website this morning. The owner of Gun Supplies declined to be interviewed, but the listings were deleted after RNZ got in touch. Meanwhile, gun traders are accusing the government of ignoring their legitimate concerns about the way gun reforms are being rushed through. The head of the retail store Guns New Zealand, Jim Yates, says with written submissions closing tomorrow, there's no time for the public to have its say. He says the country stands to lose tens of millions of dollars in tourist revenue from international shooting events, which would become illegal under new laws. The police say the Ukrainian migrant suspected of taking his own life after a 3-hour siege in Christchurch made reference to the terror attacks. Troy Dubovsky was found dead in his car in Christchurch a week ago, and more details about the origins of the incident have now been revealed by the police. They say he came to their attention after sending emails supporting the mosque attacks, and he posed a significant threat to the community. Pharmac has hit back at accusations it is depriving cancer patients of life-saving drugs. Parliament's Health Select Committee is considering a petition calling for the drugs Ibrance and Cadzilla to be funded for advanced breast cancer. 2 drug firms have accused Pharmac of trying to save money, but Pharmac says the drugs are expensive for the benefits claimed. The Transport Agency is warning of delays in Auckland after a car caught fire on the northwestern motorway this afternoon. Fire and emergency were called to State Highway 16 between Rosebank and Point Chevalier half an hour ago, but they say no one has been injured in the fire. The Transport Agency says the blaze is causing delays in both directions. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Let's go to business now with Madison Reedy. So, Madison, well, kind of surprised with Spark's Chief Executive Simon Muta announcing he's out. Why is he leaving?
He announced he was out this morning. So he announced his resignation immediately in the same release. They also announced his replacement, which is a woman called Jolie Hodson, who's actually from within Spark's current management ranks. She's the Chief Customer Officer and previously has actually been Spark's Chief Financial Officer too. Now, this was a bizarre, I guess, in a way, announcement because the market hadn't been told or warned that Simon was even looking at departing or that a search for his replacement was underway. He says that he's leaving because he wants to spend time with his family. He doesn't quite know what he's going to do next. He didn't announce that either. But he has been there for 7 years, and that's quite a long stint for any chief executive of any company. And over that time, he has done quite a lot. He first steered its I guess in a way dissecting from Chorus to become a standalone telecommunications giant. He then led its rebrand from from Telecom, which it was once called. That seems like a lifetime ago now. So he led its rebrand through to Spark. He also has recently introduced its agile working environment. Now that's an ongoing restructure that the new chief executive is going to have to pick up and run with too. Recently also the Huawei debacle, where he said that Spark wanted to be the first to roll out 5G, and they obviously hit some hiccups there, which will certainly be ongoing too. And also Spark Sport. It seems like that was his last play for Spark. He ruthlessly started bidding for some broadcast rights. That seemed like quite the direct assault on Sky Television because they nabbed the Rugby World Cup rights off them. And it seems like to us that this is quite the end of an era for the telecommunications industry. We recently had the Vodafone Chief Executive Russell Stanners step down, and just recently John Follett, the Chief Executive and then Director of Sky Television, has stepped down too.
Interesting. And new commodity price figures are out today. What did they tell us?
They are, and it seems that the world is paying more for our largest and most crucial commodities. So the ANZ World Commodity Price Index rose 2.1% in March, and that's on the back of a 2.8% rise in February and then a 2% rise in January. So they've been rising quite significantly this year. Now that's after a quite negative 2018. Now the growth in prices lately has largely been driven up by higher dairy prices globally. So they've been rising since November when global production went low, classic supply and demand situation, less supply, demand remains the same, they can charge more for it. But overnight as well, we did have the Global Dairy Trade Price Index, that auction there, that growth there had slowed. So there was a weaker and softer growth in our global dairy prices. So the question remains to be seen whether or not this growth in our largest exports can continue. Economists seem to think that it can.
And what about the rest of the markets in our dollar today?
The NZX Top 50 Index closed up 2%. That's a rise of 19 points to close at 9,939, another record high. Spark's share price fell today, actually on the news of their chief executive. Their shares fell 3% to $3.65. The New Zealand dollar is buying at 67.7 US cents, 95.4 to the Australian and 51.5 British pence.
Wonderful. Thanks, Madison. That is Madison Reddy with Business. Meanwhile, former Sky TV CEO and board member John Follett says he was surprised to learn of Simon Moutar's sudden departure. Mr Follett, who led Sky for 28 years, resigned himself from the board last week. Our business reporter, Nona Peltier, asked him on camera why he had cut ties himself so suddenly.
Well, I gave a year's notice that I was going to retire. I waited... a lot of, just going back in history a little bit, a lot of the attention was focused on, do we get in the telecommunication business or do we merge? And the merger seemed to make the most sense, and that was a Vodafone situation. And so that was a good 2-year process going on. And, I've been criticized a bit that people said, well, you should have had a plan B. Well, we had a plan B. We just don't want to spend money that we couldn't use that equipment if the Vodafone merger went through. And so we were basically stymied on going forward until we had the outcome of the Commerce Commission. And once that happened, then we jumped into our plans, and Sky's well down the path on those now.
Do you think your customers have been disadvantaged, as your successor has indicated?
Well, I did not see what aspect of it is. I mean, on NPS, we score pretty well. Where we have the challenges are on the retail price. That's the only thing that we typically get criticisms for. Our customer service is pretty good. Our reliability of the service is pretty good. Our installation, all those sites, all those people come out pretty well. And I think some of it is, you look at Netflix, which by the way is a great service. They don't do linear channels. They don't do movies. They don't do sports. Those are the 3 most expensive parts of the content game. They buy and create series and sell it at, probably looking at their global financial reports, probably sell at a loss. So I just don't think long term that can continue, that they'll have to get either a heck of a lot more customers or start raising the rates, and you'll see less of a discrepancy. I mean, Sky has launched Neon, and so those prices cover and match the Netflix offer.
Do you think, were you surprised that Simon Moutar stepped down as he did?
I really was. I figured Simon, who I know well and worked with and against over the last 7 years, I guess he's been there, was going to stay there till he retired. So it was a surprise for me. But look, these things happen. All of a sudden, you wake up one morning and decide, is this what I want to spend the rest of my life doing? And Simon, the answer was no today, or whenever he made the call, and he's leaving. You haven't seen the last of him. He'll pop up somewhere else.
How about you? What are you going to do next?
I'm doing a lot of fun with consultancy now. So content was always my expertise in the area that I had the most fun. So I'm advising copyright holders, the content providers, and content platforms. And so I've got about 8 clients, and all of them outside of New Zealand, because I'd be conflicted here, but all international players, and I'm advising them on how to get their rights into different markets.
What about for Sky? Are you through with them?
Look, I've got now I joined 91, so 28 years of emotional investment. It still makes up a sizable amount of the family wealth as it is, and so Sky, even if I didn't own any shares, Sky will always be my baby. And it kind of reminds me of Craig Heatley. Craig Heatley started Sky, hasn't been a shareholder in 20 years yet. Boy, when he saw something I was doing wrong, he never hesitated to call me, and likewise, I never hesitated to call him when I wanted to bounce an idea off of him. And I hope that continues with me and Simon Martin, the new CEO.
And that's the former Sky TV CEO, John Follett. Schools and churches in the Auckland suburb of Glen Eden spent hours in lockdown today after reports of gunfire in the area. The police and armed defenders squad surrounded a house on West Coast Road just after 10 o'clock and a large police cordon was put in place. Katie Scotcher was there.
From the edge of the cordon, dozens of police cars and armed officers could be seen outside a Glen Eden property. At least 10 people, some wrapped in blankets, were also outside. Emergency services were alerted to the incident just after 10 o'clock this morning, and cordons were put on West Coast Road near Glendale Road. Witnesses described a heavy police presence in the area, and buildings also went into lockdown. Pramila Beale manages an op shop next to the property of interest. She was walking towards a nearby car park when she saw a woman crying.
A young boy actually screaming at her, and she was trying to stop this young boy going next door because she believes that the next door person had a gun.
Pramila said the woman had contacted police, so she went inside the neighbouring church like she does every Wednesday.
So we went and started playing Scrabble, which was in the front room here. And after some time, we had a couple of games, and the police said, I think I need you to move out further back, into the church building. So we moved out right up to the next wall so we could be safe in case there was some bullets coming through those windows.
She spent the next 2.5 hours in lockdown.
I was concerned, but then I thought, well, the police are here. Nothing happened, but there could have been disaster, really, yeah.
Colin and Heather Hughes volunteer at the op shop and arrived there at around 10 this morning. Colin says not long after, police officers walked in and told them to stay inside.
The next minute he came back in and said, no, lock up the shop and walk that way.
Heather says they were asked to wait outside the cordon near the Glen Eden shops.
So we just had to fill in the time, but we've been sitting down there for about an hour, I suppose, just on the desk, a couple of 200 metres down the road, waiting, hoping that we could get back in and go home.
Multiple schools, including Glen Eden Primary School, also went into lockdown as a precautionary measure. Anna Marie Turner's son, who goes there, says Glen Eden has become a very unsafe area.
The police are down here every single day dealing with people, and in the last 6 months we've had the ANZ robbed, the TAB robbed. So yeah, it's just been a very dangerous area now that I'm looking at moving in the next year.
RNZ understands the police were called to the same property yesterday afternoon. The police are yet to confirm if a firearm was involved in today's incident. They say strong lines of inquiry are being followed, but no arrests have yet been made. I tamaki makoto muti hotaka uti ahi nei, ko Katie Scotcher aho.
Drug giants today accuse drug buyer Pharmac of leaving terminally ill cancer patients to die rather than forking out for the latest drugs. Parliament's Health Select Committee is considering a petition signed by almost 34,000 people calling for funding for 2 life-prolonging breast cancer drugs. It's already heard from patients, and today was the turn of the drug makers and Pharmac. Our health correspondent Karen Brown was there.
MPs heard today that 3,300 women are diagnosed with breast cancer every year in this country, and 600 with advanced breast cancer die from it. They've already had heartfelt pleas from patients seeking funding for the latest drugs, Ibrance and Kadcyla, to help prolong their lives. Today, the drug makers took over the fight, attacking the government's drug buyer Pharmac for its processes, the time it takes to consider new drugs, and the consequences of those decisions. A director at Roche, Angela Pantano, told MPs other countries, including Australia, are funding Kadcyla, but not New Zealand.
Other countries are willing to pay for innovation. We don't understand why the life of a person in Australia, the UK, Ireland or Canada, for example, is considered more valuable than the life of a Kiwi.
Angela Pantano says drug companies wait months for any indication from Pharmac about what it thinks of applications for funding and where they are in the pipeline. Ms Pantano added that while decisions are put off, Pharmac expects to save about $200 million for the health system over 4 years, money that could be spent on drugs.
While we understand how those savings have been created by combining the hospital medicines list and the CPB, the fact still remains that Pharmac forewent the opportunity to fund up to $50 million of medicines every year. People in New Zealand are dying while waiting for treatment.
41 patients in New Zealand are paying $6,500 every 3 weeks for Kadcyla under a cost-sharing program with Roche, but Ms Pantano says that only adds to rising health inequality.
What is the level of comfort in creating a two-tiered system which the private market creates?
Pfizer New Zealand senior manager Justin Binko says its Ibrance drug is seen by doctors as the standard of care, and it's hard to fathom why it's not publicly funded here.
It has been registered in 85 countries and funded in 29. It has been accepted around the world with over 120,000 patients being treated globally. It is recommended in all the major clinical oncology guidelines throughout the world.
Ibrance has a price tag of around $5,800 a month. Pharmac's chief executive, Sarah Fitt, defended their processes.
These medicines are coming with a sort of low, medium priority with quite a high price tag. We have other medicines who have a higher priority that we will actually be looking to fund more quickly.
Sarah Fitt is also unconvinced that the drug's benefits would be worth it if they were publicly funded.
We've seen in a lot of these cases that the evidence looks promising, but our clinicians on our committees do not believe that in many cases the evidence justifies the prices that have been asked.
Evidence or not, this is unlikely to stop calls for new expensive drugs that appear to have been effective in other countries from being funded here. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ahi, ko Karen Brownaho.
A desire to have two specialist wicket-keepers is the reason for Tom Blundell's surprise selection in the New Zealand squad for the looming Cricket World Cup. Along with the inclusion of Ish Sodhi as the team's second spin bowler, the Wellington Gloveman is the notable feature of the 15-man squad revealed at Taitapu Primary School near Christchurch. Blundell is one of just 6 of the squad currently in New Zealand, with the other 9 playing in the Indian Premier League before the side heads to the UK in mid-May. Cricket reporter Clay Wilson has more.
So without further ado, the 2019 Cricket World Cup squad, 15 players, is Kane Williamson, captain from Northern Districts, Tom Blundell from Wellington.
Some would have been surprised to hear coach Gary Stead read Tom Blundell's name out as a member of the Black Caps World Cup squad. The man himself, not so much.
Oh, not really. I was sort of communicated throughout the season that you've got a possibility of making the team, and then to get the nod, it's pretty special.
Blundell's joy, however, is Tim Seifert's disappointment. Seifert played 3 one-day internationals over the summer and was widely seen as the obvious backup to first-choice Gloveman Tom Latham. While he suffered an untimely finger injury a fortnight ago, Seifert would have been ready in time for the World Cup. Stead says Blundell's selection ahead of Seifert comes down to Blundell's abilities as a genuine keeper.
For us, picking Tom was a direct, replacement for Tom Latham if he was injured. And if that was the case, then he can fit straight into the batting role that we see that Tom Latham plays as well.
Blundell scored a century in the first of his 2 tests at the end of 2017 and has also played 3 T20 internationals. But the 28-year-old has never played a one-day game for the Black Caps, has a modest average of 24 in the format at domestic level, and played just one 50-over match over the entire summer, none of which was a concern for Stead.
Tom's only had 1 international game, but he scored 100 in it, and he's a fine keeper as well. And that at the end of the day is why he's got the nod over others, is his ability with the gloves.
The selection of Ish Sodhi also garnered attention after he won his battle with fellow leg spinner Todd Astle to be Mitchell Santner's partner in the specialist spin department. Sodhi is one of 9 squad members currently in India, playing in the world's most glamorous T20 league. Headed for his 4th one-day World Cup, senior batsman Ross Taylor admits it makes for a slightly disjointed build-up to the tournament.
The warm-up games of the World Cup are going to be very important, when the whole team will be assembled there, a bit more than most tournaments. But, the experience of guys who are playing in county cricket will have to come to the fore, and hopefully we can do that.
With just the top 4 qualifying for the semi-finals after a full round-robin involving all 10 teams, the contribution from that senior contingent looms as crucial for the Black Caps. If he gets an opportunity, Blundell will do so at the opposite end of the experience spectrum. Regardless, he's happy his plans for the coming months have changed.
I was looking at quite a quiet winter, just sort of having that sort of chill time to myself, but now it's changed completely. So now I'm really looking forward to it and what lies ahead.
The Black Caps wider squad has 3 two-day camps at their training base near Christchurch this month, before a New Zealand 11 faces an Australian selection in 3 50-over matches in Brisbane early next month. A pair of warm-up matches against India and the West Indies come after the team lands in England, with their tournament opener against Sri Lanka in Cardiff on June 1st. Moti hotaka o te hipone, ko Clay Wilson aho.
It's 10 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz, or you can flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Americans could face an avocado shortage and higher prices for fruits and vegetables if President Donald Trump carries out his threat to shut down the US-Mexico border. Fred Katayama reports.
That guacamole or avocado toast you crave could soon cost you more if you can find it. American consumers would get hit in the gut if President Donald Trump carries out his threat to shut down the U.S.-Mexico border. That's because nearly half of the imported veggies and 40% of imported fruit Americans eat come from their southern neighbor, some $137 billion in food imports. That means tomatoes, cucumbers, blackberries, raspberries, and especially avocados. Mexico supplies virtually all the avocados sold in the U.S. right now. The largest distributor, Mission Produce, says Americans would run out of avocados in 3 weeks if imports were stopped. And one consultant says shoppers would be slapped with higher price tags for Mexican produce. Mexicans wouldn't be immune from a border closure either. Their country is the largest importer of refined fuels from the U.S.
And that was Fred Katayama reporting there. The Auckland graffiti artist who painted a poignant mural of a victim of the mosque attacks has been invited to paint another tribute, this time in Christchurch. Paul X. Walsh's painting in Avondale is accompanied by the words, "Remember the heroes," and the date the attacks happened. The image struck a chord on social media, and now Paul has been offered flights to Christchurch, accommodation and a wall to paint on in the city. Joanna McKenzie has the story.
Paul X. Walsh painted the image of Naeem Rashid because he felt he needed to do something in response to the attacks of March the 15th. The Pakistani national was one of the 50 people who died in the mosque attacks, hailed as a hero after he tried to tackle the gunman to save the lives of others.
For me, this was more of almost a visceral response, like I sort of had to do something to express my personal feelings about what happened, and that's why I had to go for it straight away.
He says the messages of support he's received have been overwhelming.
The amount of attention it got online and the amount of messages I got, really humbling. I feel like artists sort of have a sense to try and reflect how the community feels at times, but that really feels like the case here.
In an interview on RNZ, Mr. Walsh mentioned that he'd like to do a similar tribute in Christchurch. Victoria Pomeroy, who owns Pomeroy's and Little Pom's Cafe on the corner of Kilmore Street and Fitzgerald Avenue, heard the interview and immediately thought of a wall that will suit.
I rang my daughter, Ava, who manages Pomeroy's and Little Pom's, and said to her that that Paul was looking for a space and that perhaps this big red building with such a high profile on the corner here could perhaps be just right as something to offer to the community, to Christchurch and to all.
The wall's been standing since the late 1800s and has about 40,000 cars pass by it each day. As to what the tribute will be, Mrs. Pomeroy is happy to be led by Mr. Walsh and Naeem Rashid's family.
My thought around that was that would be his choice and what felt right. Also, whether or not it was with Naeem's family, the choice, or Paul's choice, it didn't really matter. If he felt that this space was suitable, I felt that we were happy to offer it.
Many of the images that Paul X. Walsh paints in Auckland are on public buildings, so eventually they get painted over by him or by other artists. The image that will be painted here at Pomeroy's is on a private building, so it will become a lasting memorial to what happened in Christchurch on March the 15th. One idea that Paul X. Walsh has been thinking about is a tribute to all the victims.
The one I'd love to do in Christchurch would be not so much portrait work, but 50 flowers, for example, is one idea that I've been floating, sort of international flowers from around the world in a similar style within a space.
Naeem Rashid's widow, Ambreen, says an image by Paul X. Walsh in Christchurch will be very welcome.
It will encourage the feeling of mutual coexistence. Love between all the humans.
Ambreen Rashid also lost her eldest son Tala in the attacks. She likes the idea of 50 flowers, but she also wants Mr. Walsh to be able to express himself in his paintings.
Artists usually make things out of their own love. I would always encourage what they like, and I'm not someone to tell him that you make this or that. It's whatever he will make it out of his own love.
Paul X. Walsh says before he even lifts a spray can, he'll consult with the Rashid family as well as the local Muslim community in Christchurch. For Checkpoint, called Joanna Mackenzie-Aho.
And Alex Perrottet, Annika Smith also contributed that story along with camera operators Simon Rogers and Nick Munro. And it will go up on our Facebook page and online if you'd like to have a look at the beautiful pictures in that. In Australia, politicians have been hitting the election campaign following last night's budget. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg is offering voters a program of tax cuts to lure them back to the Liberal National Coalition after a hit in the polls since Malcolm Turnbull's ousting as Prime Minister. Scott Morrison is predicted to announce the election date later this week and has already canvassed 3 options for May. But today, Josh Frydenberg and other leading MPs were busy in TV and radio studios across the country working to sell their message. Here's the ABC's Alexandra Beach.
Back in black, congestion busting and a positive plan. With the budget handed down, the election slogans are coming thick and fast. And the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, says voters have a clear choice.
We're for lower taxes, Bill Shorten's for higher taxes.
The political stakes of the 2019 budget couldn't be much higher. The coalition is pegging its electoral hopes on its delivery of a projected surplus. It forecasts a $7.1 billion surplus next financial year, although first there's a deficit of more than $4 billion to weather this year.
$7.1 billion is significant, but what is important is the trajectory that we've been on. You don't just turn up with a surplus on budget night overnight. That is the product of hard work, discipline, decision making. It is no accident.
But the forecast surpluses are pretty thin, and several global economic challenges could still shake things up. So the Shadow Treasurer, Chris Bowen, is sceptical.
Some of the things underpinning the surplus are not things which are particularly robust or to be proud of. Wages growth in the budget, in the forecast, jumps up like a magic beanstalk in the latter years of the forward estimates and underpins budget surpluses going forward. I'm cynical about that.
The centrepiece of Josh Frydenberg's budget is $158 billion in income tax cuts over a decade, setting things up for an election battle over tax.
And if you're a couple, a tradie and a teacher, each earning $60,000, you'll have an additional $2,160 in your bank account in 13 weeks' time when you put in your next tax return.
But Labor leader Bill Shorten says the party's tax policies are now pretty similar.
It means that on July the 1st, listeners can know that whoever wins the election, there'll be that round of tax cuts. They're affordable.
And prepare for the politicians to break out the hard hats and fluoro vests over coming weeks to spruik the $100 billion set aside in the budget for roads and rail infrastructure over the next decade. The government says it'll link farms to markets and make regional roads safer. Here's the Nationals leader, Michael McCormack.
It really was an infrastructure budget, and certainly a budget for the bush.
With a large chunk of that infrastructure funding headed for Queensland, it could also help shore up several key marginal LNP seats. But crossbench Senator Darren Hinch predicts it won't be enough to save the government.
I still think Labor will win, but I think with this budget and some other events in the last few days, I think that ScoMo and his team may be able to make it less of a rout than I thought it would be. I don't think it's enough to turn it around.
And that was Senator Darren Hinch ending that report from Alexandra Beach in Canberra. And just returning to a story we played earlier in the show, which was a video statement from David Tipple, the owner of Gun City. And with that, we had experts and community leaders responding to some of his claims. A lot of feedback on this. And Vicky says, I can't understand why people think automatic guns are even necessary. Ordinary people completely agree with this. No one is saying people can't have guns. It's madness, says Vicky.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. MPs have been deluged with several thousand submissions on the proposed gun ban and buyback since the official call for feedback went out yesterday. The bill, which will ban most types of semi-automatic firearms, is being rushed through Parliament and is expected to pass into law by the end of next week. A select group of about 20 to 25 people has been invited to present their views in person to a select committee tomorrow. The committee chair and Labor MP Michael Wood says the written response has already been huge.
I understand it's several thousand at this stage and there are more still coming in, so there is a big interest in this. Obviously some of those will be relatively form submissions that might be quite similar to other submissions, but I think a lot of people want to have their say on this issue.
Michael Wood says the public wants the government to move quickly following the Christchurch shootings. The Privacy Commissioner has been told by Facebook it has not changed a thing about its live streaming functions since March the 15th. John Edwards spoke with the social media giant today, but was disappointed the company has taken no practical steps to improve the service. Facebook has been heavily criticised for allowing the live streaming and sharing of the Christchurch terror attack on its platform. Mr Edwards says Facebook has admitted it has not done anything that would prevent a similar live stream occurring and being shared. Last week, Facebook's Chief Operating Officer said the social media giant must do more to stamp out hate and support the New Zealand community. The Maori Council is to measure government outcomes for Māori and compare them year on year. The Council is planning to use the figures to hold the government to account. Our Māori News correspondent Lee Marama McLaughlin reports.
The Maori Council wants to keep tabs on whether things are getting better or worse for Māori in various agencies such as health, oranga tamariki and justice. Its Executive Director Matthew Tukaki says they'll measure the government's performance in respect of the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The declaration has 46 articles touching on all aspects of Indigenous rights from whānau, culture and community. Mr Tukaki says the Council will work with Massey University to report on the findings every December and hopes to work with the government to find solutions. Kuli Marama McLaughlin tēnei.
The MP Shane Jones is defending claims that comments he made about a court case against a Northland trucking company amounted to a conflict of interest. Mr Jones, who is related to Stan Seminoff of Seminoff Logging and is also the Associate Transport Minister, expressed concern about the economic implications of the case. Mr Jones defended his comments in Parliament this afternoon.
The principles of comity and privilege are important constitutional privileges that define our system, but there is no stone that should be put upon the tongue of the champion of the regions to talk about the implications of decisions that our government may from time to time be held accountable for.
That's the Regional Economic Development and Associate Transport Minister Shane Jones. Forest and Bird says rubbish strewn along the west coast after an old landfill flooded is potentially the biggest eco-disaster since the Rena oil spill in Bay of Plenty. It is urging the government to step in and coordinate a national level response. Forest and Bird spokesperson Jen Miller says the local council and volunteers now trying to clean up the coast are well-meaning but under-resourced. Ms Miller says there could be hazardous substances in the waste that are putting volunteers at risk, and she wants the Ministry for the Environment to take charge. Australian senators from both sides of the political divide have joined to censure Senator Fraser Anning for his anti-Muslim comments in the wake of the Christchurch shootings. Mr Anning said the cause of the attacks was Muslim immigration and showed Islam was always associated with violence. The motion of censure was carried without a formal vote, but the Green Senator Sarah Hanson-Young said it didn't go far enough and Mr Anning should be suspended from the Senate.
I'm not even going to call him Senator Anning because he doesn't deserve it. He must be suspended. He is not fit to represent the Australian people. He's not fit to call himself Australian. He is not us.
Sarah Hanson-Young. The head of the Crusaders says their sword-wielding horsemen and the pre-match entertainment have been dropped for the rest of the season as the team looks at a name and image change. The BNZ Crusaders and New Zealand Rugby have hired a research company to help them decide on the team's future labelling name in response to the mosque attacks. The chief executive of BNZ Crusaders, Colin Mansbridge, says the researchers will look at whether the name is kept but the imagery changes or whether they go with a new name. Mr Mansbridge says while the horses, crosses and swords may combine to reference the religious crusades, that was not what was intended. It's 6:05. The Wellington wicketkeeper Tom Blundell has never played a one-day cricket international for New Zealand but says his selection for the World Cup hasn't come as a surprise. Blundell has been named in the 15-strong Black Caps squad for the tournament in England and Wales, which starts next month. He's played 2 tests and 3 T20 games for New Zealand, but has edged out Tim Seifert for the backup keeping spot to Tom Latham. Blundell says coach Gary Stead kept in touch with him over the summer.
I was sort of communicated throughout the season that you've got a possibility of making the team, and then to get the nod. It's pretty special. I've worked hard on my work throughout the season, so it's sort of just coming nicely.
Italian teenager Moise Kean has reacted defiantly to racist abuse after scoring a late goal to give Juventus a 2-0 win in Cagliari in Italian football's Series A. Kean, who had been jeered throughout the game, stood in front of the Cagliari fans behind the goal and opened his arms. Afterwards, he posted on Instagram that it was the best way to respond to racism. It comes just hours after the UEFA president, Alexander Ceferin, called for referees to be brave and stop games when there is racial abuse. The New Zealand Women's Rugby League team, the Kiwi Ferns, are set to enhance an all-Pacific doubleheader when they play Whetu Samoa on June the 22nd at Mount Smart Stadium. The two sides haven't met since 2008 when New Zealand beat Samoa 24-6 at the Rugby League World Cup. The Oceania Cup match between New Zealand Kiwis and Mate Maatonga will follow. That's the news.
Stemming the flow.
I've rafted on a river for many years down there. I'm very familiar with it. And this is a dilemma that's been coming. Councils have had their heads in the sand.
Ending the chase.
Young people themselves are egging people on, even adult drivers. Do it. See if you can outrun. So what the police have called for is a better understanding of the teenage brain.
And finding the guns.
Police officers have been shot by gang members. I've certainly seen this.
Plenty to see here. Morning reports, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, top UK pollster Sir John Curtis. Amid all the talk of a second Brexit referendum, what are voters actually thinking? And after 10, best-selling English singer and writer, Everything But the Girls, Tracy Thorn, on why suburbia was the making of her. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, a few showers, possibly heavy, but mainly dry for Auckland City. Becoming fine tomorrow morning. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine weather, however, isolated showers affect the Central High Country and also Bay of Plenty and Taupo from tomorrow afternoon. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, often cloudy with a few showers. Wellington, Wairarapa and coastal Marlborough, fine spells and isolated showers today, fine tomorrow. Inland Marlborough and Nelson, fine weather. For Bulla, mainly fine but isolated coastal showers tomorrow morning. Westland and Fiordland mostly fine today, however late showers in Fiordland, showers spreading northwards tomorrow, clearing Fiordland from tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury mostly fine, rain spreading northwards tomorrow evening. Otago and Southland fine today, rain spreading northwards tomorrow, followed by showers. And for the Chatham Islands, a few showers. It's 6:08, you're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna, and this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Gun traders and competition shooters are urging the government to put the brakes on fast-track changes to gun laws, warning that implications haven't been thought through. MPs are being deluged with submissions on the fast-tracked legislation, which will ban most types of semi-automatic firearms. There will also be a buyback scheme, which is estimated to cost up to $200 million. Tomorrow, selected members of the public have their only chance to make their case to the Select Committee. Catherine Hutton reports.
Jim Yates is the head of Guns NZ, a retail store and online shop. He started the company 6 years ago to bring in high-quality rifles, pistols and accessories for the competitive shooters. They typically hold e-endorsements on their gun licences, which are part of the proposed ban. He says lawmakers shouldn't ignore them.
Every little community in New Zealand has a rifle club, a pistol club, a skeet club. And this is where everybody gets together with their friends and enjoys their sport. People with licenses in this country and their families represent probably 10 to 15% of the New Zealand population, but we're just being completely ignored.
The Deerstalkers Association is also worried. Its spokesperson Bill O'Leary says quite a few of their members are also competition shooters, and the ban spells the end of those events.
The investment in not only the cost of the firearm that they've been using is an issue, but there's also the fact that people have put time and effort and I guess made a significant commitment to honing their skills in a particular competition.
Jim Yates says the implication of the ban hasn't been thought through.
The amount of money that New Zealand will lose in tourist revenue from the competition shooting is in the tens of millions of dollars, because this country hosts numerous international events all over the country at various venues that now are illegal.
He also questions how the buyback will work and what it will cover. He believes the $100 to $200 million estimate is way too low. He says even determining fair market value of a gun isn't straightforward.
They can't just say, well, an AR is worth $1,500, because there's 400 different ARs listed on the approved list, and they come in all makes and models, and then everybody adds parts to them. They may add a $500 trigger, a different handguard, a $200 buttstock, a $50 pistol grip.
The government has also said it has no plans to reimburse dealers like Jim Yates, and he says that's unfair.
Dealers are people. They're people's sons and grandfathers and uncles that were granted permission by the police to run a business and to import firearms for their customers. And for them to now say that these people have no rights, but all their customers have rights for reimbursement, isn't right in a democratic society.
And he says suggestions by the Police Minister Stuart Nash that dealers can return their stock is laughable.
And as far as Nash is concerned, well, dealers can just send it back overseas. Well, you can't do that. It's impractical. Stuff's been on the shelves for 2 or 3 years. Old models, old products. Who's going to pay for that? Most of the stuff has end-use agreements for New Zealand. It can't be sent out of New Zealand.
Mr Nash says at this stage dealers are not part of the buyback scheme, but they are welcome to make a submission. For Checkpoint, Catherine Hutton.
In Britain, Prime Minister Theresa May is now pinning her hopes of finalising a deal to leave the European Union on fresh talks with Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. Mrs May's Brexit deal has been voted down 3 times by MPs. Today, after an epic 7-hour cabinet meeting, she emerged to say she would seek an extension of the timeline by which Britain is to leave the EU. But it's her decision to negotiate with Labour which has been condemned by many of her backbench MPs. Former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson is critical, saying he fears a softer Brexit where Britain is still under the thumb of Europe. The BBC's John Pienaar with this report on yet another chaotic day in British politics.
After 2 failed attempts at Brexit and a big split in cabinet, the Prime Minister finally felt forced to consider compromise. Her announcement in Downing Street, a dramatic change of direction.
I know there are some who are so fed up with delay and endless arguments that they would like to leave with no deal next week. I've always been clear that we could make a success of no deal in the long term, but leaving with a deal is the best solution. So we will need a further extension of Article 50, one that is as short as possible and which ends when we pass a deal. I'm offering to sit down with the Leader of the Opposition and to try to agree a plan that we would both stick to to ensure that we leave the European Union and that we do so with a deal. If we cannot agree on a single unified approach, then we would instead agree a number of options for the future relationship that we could put to the House in a series of votes to determine which course to pursue. Crucially, the government stands ready to abide by the decision of the House. But to make this process work, the opposition would need to agree to this too.
Senior ministers emerged after a grinding 7 hours at the table. Brexiteers didn't like Theresa May's plan and said so, though one, more supportive of Mrs May, tried to keep a lid on dissent.
I think everyone recognises that it would have been preferable if we'd secured support for the withdrawal agreement last week. Sadly, we didn't command a majority in the House of Commons, and we now need to ensure that we can get a majority for us leaving the European Union.
The Labour leader, invited now to offer his ideas for Brexit, again spelt them out.
We've put forward our proposals, which are to ensure there is a customs union with the European Union, that there is access to those markets, and above all, there's protections of our standards of consumer, environmental and, of course, workers' rights. And we'll ensure that those are there on the table so that there is no danger of crashing out.
But at Westminster, most MPs lean towards a so-called softer Brexit, potentially closer to the EU than that on offer by Mrs May. Conservative Brexiteers are angry, and the thought of building bridges with Jeremy Corbyn, or trying to, has gone down badly, especially with one who's a likely contender for Mrs May's job.
The result will almost certainly be, if Corbyn gets his way, that we remain in the customs union so that we can't control our trade policy, the huge areas of lawmaking we can't control, and Brexit is becoming soft to the point of disintegration.
Senior MPs who've been pushing for compromise have welcomed the possibility of Brexit by consensus, but weren't taking it on trust.
After 2 3/4 years, she's now said she wants to reach out, but we have been here before, and the net result was the Prime Minister listened politely, but her mind remained closed. And she really needs to give, I think, Parliament an indication that she is willing to move.
Brexit has strained trust in politics and torn the fabric of Labour and the Tories. Mrs May has accelerated a reckoning in her party that may have been unavoidable. Her talks with Jeremy Corbyn and the coming votes in Parliament will frame any consensus that's possible. The EU will then decide whether to grant Britain a Brexit delay. But if Mrs May does buy more time, it's time that will be used by her critics and potential successors who are keen to end her time in number 10 and carry on Brexit under new management.
John Pina at Westminster. Temperatures across the country have finally taken an autumnal turn after what seemed like a long extension to summer. Figures released today by NIWA have confirmed what most of us have suspected. It's been hotter than normal recently. In fact, it's just been the second equal warmest March on record. Now, joining me now to explain this is NIWA meteorologist Seth Carrier. Seth, why has it been so warm? What's contributed to that?
Well, there's been two main factors for why March of 2019 was so warm. First of all, we had high pressure that was near or to the east of the country, and that promotes more northeasterly winds than normal. And for us here in New Zealand, northerly or northeasterly winds tend to be on the warmer side. So we had a warm wind flow, and also the waters around New Zealand have been much warmer than average once again this summer and early autumn. And so those two things combined have led to the very warm temperatures.
So let's name check a few places. What were the hottest places?
Well, the warmest place overall during the month of March was actually Whangaparoa, north of Auckland. They had an average temperature, or mean temperature, for the month of March of 20.8 degrees, and that was about 1.8 degrees warmer than their normal March average. So a very warm month for the Auckland region, but also for the country as a whole.
So do you reckon this is kind of the new normal for the beginning of autumn?
I don't know if we can say it's a new normal. We have had quite a few months consecutively that have been warmer than average. In fact, it's been about 27 months. I think the beginning of 2017 was the last time that we had a month where temperatures were actually cooler than average. That being said, I think it's more the particular setup we have this month with those northeasterly winds and the warm waters. If all those things weren't present, I think it's quite possible temperatures, say next March or the March after that, could be closer to average or even below average. So it's tough to say it's going to be a continuing trend, but with climate change in the background, I think overall in the span of the next, decade or two, I think temperatures overall will continue to rise.
And so what has been the difference, if any, with rainfall in that time?
Well, one thing that you can look forward to with warmer air temperatures, the warmer the air is, the more water vapor it can hold. And with more water vapor in the air, rainfalls can tend to be a bit heavier. So that is one thing that as we look further into the future in the long term, we could be dealing with some heavier rainfalls due to warmer air temperatures.
Now, I've got to say, at the risk of sounding like a terrible Aucklander, there was a bit of a brisk breeze around my ankles at the bus stop today, Seth, and I'm wondering about the immediate future. Is that it for the warm spell now? Do I need to pull the stockings out of my drawers?
Well, in the short term, I would say yes. We are looking at some substantially cooler temperatures as we go through the next few days. I think Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Those 3 days in particular, you will notice temperatures cooler than average, probably into Sunday as well. Now, I do think as we go into next week, there could be a little bit of a warm-up, but there are some indications that overall, the first half or even two-thirds of April, temperatures could, in some places in the country, be generally a little bit cooler than average. I do think longer term, that's probably going to reverse itself, but yeah, some cooler temperatures I do think are on the cards, especially in the next few days.
Appreciate your time. Thank you. That's Seth Carrier from Niwa. So April might be a little bit more chilly than usual. The World Sevens Series resumes in Hong Kong this week, with Fiji chasing a record-extending fifth straight title in the spiritual home of the seven-a-side game. Samoa also has designs on a first Hong Kong title since 2010, while Papua New Guinea, Tonga and the Cook Islands are chasing a permanent place in the sevens competition. Vinnie Wiley reports.
Fiji are widely accepted as the kings of the sevens rugby game, and nowhere are their subjects more appreciative than in the mecca of sevens rugby, Hong Kong. The Olympic champions have won a record 18 titles in the city, including the last 4 in a row. Despite coming up short in the past 3 World Series tournaments, head coach Gareth Baber says Hong Kong is a place where Fiji love to play.
You know, we know what it's like to win here. We know we've got players who know what it's like to win here. We know under no illusions in how tough it is this year with the quality of teams that are opposite us. But the focus is very much on delivering what we set out as a mission at the beginning of the season and doing it in the right manner, doing it in the way that we love to play rugby, the behaviours that the players show around other teams and on the field as well. And most importantly, you know, doing it for our God and for country.
The defending champions, who will be without regular skipper Kalione Nasoko because of injury, open their title defence on Friday against Kenya and face a difficult doubleheader on Saturday against Australia and New Zealand, who both got the better of Fiji in Las Vegas last month. Meanwhile, Samoa are looking to continue their recent upsurge in form after finishing runners-up in the USA and 6th in Vancouver. The 4-time Hong Kong winners will face Scotland, Japan and South Africa in pool play as they look to reach the Cup quarterfinals at 3 consecutive tournaments for the first time since 2014. But it's not just the main event where big prizes are on offer. 12 men's and 12 women's teams are also competing in the World Series qualifier for a permanent spot on next year's World Series. The Papua New Guinea women's coach, Paul Titchens, says in sevens any team can win on any given day, and there's no reason that can't be them.
If our team can play to their potential, on paper, I believe that we have a good enough side to really push and be good enough to really compete for that core status title. It starts with the first game against Hong Kong. That'll be the game we're really targeting. If we can start well, that'll hopefully generate some confidence and obviously some positivity moving forward to Uganda and Kenya.
Tonga ended a 5-year absence from the Men's World Series by competing at the Hamilton and Sydney tournaments earlier this year. The Kingdom claimed major scalps in beating France, Kenya and Japan, and team manager Richard Whiteman says they were lucky enough to play a series of matches against the All Blacks Sevens team at a tournament in South Auckland earlier this month, which ensured they will arrive in Hong Kong in peak playing condition.
key focus for them was promoting women's rugby, and they had about 5 countries play at Pukako, but they invited us along, and ourselves and New Zealand a couple of weeks ago played 5 games over 2 days at international sevens rules. So we couldn't have better preparation, with that. That's really helped, and that's allowed the boys to keep really focused by preparing for that, a couple of weeks out before going to Hong Kong.
Tonga begin their qualifier campaign against Zimbabwe and the Philippines on Friday, with the Cook Islands taking on Chile and Germany. But first up, it's the PNG Piraeus on Thursday against Hong Kong, Uganda and Kenya. This is Vinnie Wiley.
The New Zealand Silver Ferns are turning to a not-so-secret weapon to prepare for this year's World Cup, playing the national men's team. And ahead of their invitational match in June, there could be a world first, with the men's team being led by a transgender coach. Sarah Michelle Hansen-Vial believes she's the first transgender person to coach any national sports team. Netball reporter Ravinda Hunia spoke with Sarah Michelle about what that means for her community.
Sarah Michelle Hansen-Vial could be the world's first coach who identifies as transgender to head an international sports team. She's certain she's New Zealand's. After being named as the men's invitational co-coach to compete in the June international series against the Silver Ferns, Fiji and the All-Stars, Vial has been inundated with messages from the transgender community who agree with her.
Trans community, especially the younger ones, actually feeling like they have a space in the game. Visibility of this really helps the community feel that they're a part of it. Because again, there's no visibility anywhere else in netball of trans being acknowledged.
Since RNZ first reported in November last year that the International Netball Federation excludes men from competing on the world stage, the Silver Ferns coach has sought out the men's side to help them prepare for the World Cup. Nolene Thodua says they're the most fierce competition around, and Vial herself says she's been involved in training with and against our elite female teams for over 15 years.
From Ruth Aiken right up until Janine, and I haven't worked with Knowles yet because they haven't had the men in yet since 2002, being a player, and then the end of Ruth's coaching, and then through Y and through Janine, always been the point of contact for their Auckland training camps. Being in that environment, watching all those coaches come in, and you can get as much paperwork as you want, but being in with those athletes and those coaches, you can't pay for that experience.
To this day, top teams are testing themselves against their male counterparts. New Zealand men netballers are currently training with the Northern Stars in Papakura, with coach Kitty Wills crediting them in part for the Stars' current third placing on the ANZ Premiership ladder.
They offer us really strong opposition. They're quite physical, they're very long, but mostly it's because they offer us really good competition. It's great that it's being publicised because most Silver Ferns preparation involves some gameplay against the men, so I think it's great that the men are getting recognition for work that they've been doing probably for the last decade.
It's a sentiment being felt in other netballing nations as well. Auckland-born, Australian-based player Junior Levy captains the Queensland men's netball team and is a regular at Thodoa's training sessions with the Sunshine Coast Lightning. Levy will play for the New Zealand men's side in June and says there is a sense of jealousy across the ditch for not thinking of the concept first.
No, like the Australian Men's Netball Association are definitely very jealous. Even maybe Netball Australian Extension are feeling the same way because it's definitely an innovative move and it gets people talking, but it also gets attention to the sport worldwide, which I think, if anything, Australia, really wants to be on the forefront of.
The historic series will see men's netball receive a significant push forward. For Vial, though, it's also an important step forward in recognition and acceptance on a world stage for her transgender community.
For the trans netball community, especially because coaching's such a hard thing to get into as a person in general, let alone adding all those different dynamics of being transgender, it's really going to help uplift the community and hopefully make people want to aspire to take up coaching and not feel that there's no space for them.
Vial will lead the New Zealand men's team against the Silver Ferns during the international series from the 26th to the 29th of June. Mo te hōtako te pōnei, ko Ravinda Hunia aho.
And time for some of your feedback. We've had an overwhelming amount of feedback on our earlier item that included a video statement from David Tipple. We gave experts and community members the opportunity to respond to some of what he was saying in that. Cara of Wellington says the Gun City owner is simply looking after his own business. Personally, I would prefer all guns to be registered and microchipped so that police can track these unnecessary weapons. John, on the other hand, says, I don't agree with ACT on a lot, but on gun reform, he's right. Rushed legislation is usually flawed. Reasonable time for submission should be given for all laws. This is in respect to the fact that people will only have tomorrow to make their submissions to the Select Committee in person. Rue says many guns do not equal many violent crimes. True, but one semi-auto can take up many crimes, many crimes more than a normal rifle. Peter says, I was disappointed in the spokesperson speaking about the travesty of gun owners being denied the right to have whatever guns they want. Peter says he was a sad little contribution to a rational debate. Also on the topic of Senator Anning, this is the Aussie senator who has made some anti-Muslim comments. He was censured today in Australia. This person says Senator Anning believes he has the right to say whatever he wishes, but he refuses to accept the consequences of what he says, thus displaying his own bigoted nature. On the Crusaders and on whether they should change their name, this from Simon Gunson. I'm tired of the mealy-mouthed, insincere comments from Colin Mansbridge for the Crusaders team. They don't seem to get it that they are part of the problem and seem not at all sincere about removing the offence caused to our Muslim community. It should be remembered, he says, that the Crusaders were defeated by the Saracens. Thank you all for your feedback this evening. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to everything. Stories will be online if you want to check out some of the pictures. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening. MPs have been deluged with several thousand submissions on the proposed gun ban and buyback since the official call for feedback went out yesterday. The Privacy Commissioner has been told by Facebook it has not changed a thing about its live streaming functions since the Christchurch mosque massacre. Forest and Bird says rubbish strewn along the west coast after recent flooding is potentially the biggest eco-disaster since the Rena oil spill in Bay of Plenty. And the head of the Crusaders says their sword-wielding horsemen in the pre-match entertainment have been dropped for the rest of the season as the team looks at a name and image change. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
If you think RNZ has breached formal standards either on air or in our online content, you have the right to make a formal complaint. This must be made in writing to the broadcaster first within 20 working days of the